So this Jerusalem church that we read about in the book of Acts, they remembered Saul very well. They were the people who loved Stephen, the young man who a couple weeks ago we remember telling his story, this young man who died giving his witness for Jesus. So the Jerusalem church quickly blamed Saul for his death. They remembered how Saul dragged Christians out of their homes and hauled them off to prison. They remembered how he stirred up mobs against them. And most of all, the Jerusalem church, except the apostles, most people were dispersed to other places in the empire to avoid Saul's wrath. So in what Ann just read a couple moments ago, you have to say, they had to have been saying, when Saul appeared saying, I want to be part of your community, they had to have been saying, what is this guy really up to? He's got to be trying to trick us. You know, it's hard to live down a bad reputation. Wouldn't you agree? Really is. There's the story I heard one time about this prosecuting attorney in a small town who called his first witness to the stand, and it was this grandmotherly, elderly woman who took her seat up front and began to be questioned. And the prosecuting attorney asked her, Mrs. Jones, do you know me? And she responded, why, yes, I do know you, Mr. Williams. I've known you since you were a young boy. And frankly, you've been a disappointment to me. She said, you lie, you cheat, you manipulate people, you talk about them behind their backs, you think you're a big shot, and you haven't the brains to realize you're a fake. Yeah, I know you. So he's kind of like, well, what do I do next? So he points to the defense attorney. Do you know him? And she again replied, well, yes, I do. I've known Mr. Bradley since he was a youngster. I used to babysit him for his parents. And he's been a big disappointment as well. He's lazy, he's bigoted, he has a drinking problem, he can't hold a normal relationship, and he's a lousy lawyer. Yeah, I know him. So the judge hit the gavel, called the two attorneys up front, and said, kind of with a scowl, if either of you asks her if she knows me, you'll be put in jail for contempt. It's hard to live down a bad reputation. There was a story in the news quite a few years ago, but it was about a survivor from the sinking of the Titanic, and his name was Masabumi Hasamo. And Mr. Hasano, he was the lone Japanese passenger on the Titanic. And he was a 42-year-old bureaucrat, and he was one of the few men who survived the sinking of the ship. As the ship began to sink, many men were stopped at gunpoint so the women and children could be the first to get on the lifeboats. And Hasano, however, somehow made it onto the lifeboat, and even though he survived, when he got back home, he was branded as a coward. And back in Japan, he was fired from his job, but he had that label put to him, coward. And many years later, a letter was discovered, and what was revealed is Mr. Hasano was not a coward at all. One of the people on the ship, one of the officers, grabbed him, forced him into the boat, said, "You're gonna paddle away from this ship as quick as you can." He was basically what he did is he got on, did his very, very best, and he saved many, many lives by rowing. And still, he had that label attached to him, but he was ultimately a hero. But it's still hard to get rid of a bad reputation. It's even harder in this life to get rid of bad character, and I think we know the difference between a reputation and character. Reputation is what people say about you, and character is ultimately who you really, really are. After a while, you may be able to rescue a bad reputation, but it's a little bit more difficult to change a bad character. There are many people who believe that real change isn't possible. Probably even people in this room think that there are some people change is really, really difficult. Some people will recite they'll cite or proof text certain things. They'll go to places like Jeremiah 13, where there it says, "Can an Ethiopian change his skin, or a leper change its spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to doing evil." And if Jeremiah were right, Saul, who we read about in the book of Acts, would have remained a monster forever. But thanks be to God, he didn't. His life changed, and he became one of the most positive, influential people who has ever lived. And how did that happen? And even more important, how is it possible for you and me to change our character or to help people we love to change theirs if it's truly needed? And I think it's important to say, first of all, we need people who deep down believe in us from the bottom of their heart. In Acts, what Saul was blessed with was, first, he was blessed with a man named Ananias, who we read about last week. And today we read about Barnabas, who Saul was blessed with. Barnabas, his real name was Joseph. He was from the island of Cyprus. He was a Levite. But because of his character, because of who he was, the early apostles gave him a nickname, and the nickname was Barnabas. But the name Barnabas means son of encouragement. Son of encouragement, which is a fabulous name. There are people here in our midst, people as we look around, who we could call the Barnabas of our life. There are people in this room who are great encouragers for us. They encourage me, they encourage their friends, they encourage the young, they encourage the old. They're an incredible blessing to us. Barnabas, in the story today, what he does is powerful. It's him who stands in front of Saul and says, essentially, I'm vouching for him. He says that to all the other leaders. He is the one who helped convince the church in Jerusalem that Saul was not a monster, but a changed person. This was the real deal. We all need a Barnabas in our lives, a person who believes in us, and who is always quick to lend us their support. You know, it's important for us to note that many of us got the encouragement we needed at an early age. When we were the age of some of the kids who came forward, we were blessed with Barnabas-type parents who encouraged us on the journey, who gave us adequate praise along the way, and they gave us empathy when we messed up, and they offered us forgiveness. You know, actress Terry Garr, some of you might remember her. She is really a very, very funny lady. But she credits her mother with helping her face one of the greatest challenges of her life. You know, Terry Garr she was 11 when her father died. And Terry's mother set out to take care of this family all by herself. And her mother created this little pin, and she wore that pin, and the pin had a couple letters. The letters were E-G-B-O-K, and she wore that pin every single day, and it stood for everything's going to be okay. And memories of her mother's hard work, her resourcefulness, her positive attitude came in handy when in 1999 this very, very famous actress was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis. And that what was very neat was she didn't give up. She didn't give up her career. In fact, she used that platform to really become the spokesperson for MS for quite some time. She became the spokesman for a group called MS Lifelines. She traveled the country and gave humorous and informational talks about coping with MS. She didn't resort to focusing on the negatives in their life. She encouraged people to find joy and laugh and see the goodness of this life. She inspired many, many people as she dealt with the challenges and says, you can do it as well. Encouragement, we all know, makes a huge difference, particularly when we are trying to make an incredibly important change in our life. I think that's why we see that there are so many support groups in this world, because few people can make significant changes in their life without other people standing beside them, somebody who will believe in them and say, I'm here for you. Even more important, we need the love of Jesus with us. You know, the most popular and successful programs in this country for helping people really change their life are the 12-step programs that help people conquer addiction to alcohol and drugs. And you recognize that all those programs begin with the belief in a higher power. Most people find that they cannot truly change their character without the help of God, without God intervening. It might not be as dramatic as an encounter as Paul experienced on the road to Damascus, but still, when any of us makes a really, really significant change in life, God is always involved. You know, there's a great author named Lee Strobel who was at one point in his life a radical atheist, so opposed to anything about God. And he describes a moment in his life. He said, "My daughter Allison was 5 years old when I became a follower of Jesus." And he writes, for the first 5 years of her life, all she had known was a dad who cursed and was angry all the time. And he said, "I remember coming home one night, I kicked a hole in the living room wall. And he said, I'm ashamed to think of all the many, many times Allison was probably up in her bedroom hiding to get away from me." But he said, after 5 months after giving my life to Jesus, he said, my little girl went to my wife and said, "Mommy, I want God to do for me what he's done for Daddy. I want God to do for me what he's done for Daddy." And she'd never really read the Bible. She'd never gone to the Holy Land. She had no course in Christian doctrine. All she knew, this little child, was that her dad, who was was really, really hard to live with, all of a sudden, he was becoming someone better than he was in the past. And if that is what God does for people, this little child says, I want to follow Jesus as well. Strobel concluded that God changed my family, he changed my world, he changed my perspective forever. And I think you and I, it's important to recognize how people change. They do it ultimately with the encouragement of friends, and they also do it by the grace of Jesus, who is always with them. Amen.